In my 3 years as a delivery driver, I'd seen my fair share of weird and creepy scenarios. Houses that looked abandoned but had someone living inside, strange requests scribbled on order notes, and even stranger people answering the doors. But the night of August 17th took the cake, and it's a night I wish I could forget. The evening began just like any other shift, around 7 p.m., as the sun was setting and casting a dim orange glow over the city. My app pinged. An order for a large pepperoni pizza going to a relatively new housing development on the outskirts of town. The address was unfamiliar, but then again, I always enjoyed driving to new places. As I made my way there, I noticed the surroundings gradually thin out, from bustling city streets to quieter suburbs, and then eventually to barely lit roads flanked by dense woods. It was unsettling, to say the least. Upon arriving, I found myself at a cul-de-sac with only 3 houses, all of which appeared brand new. 2 of them still had for sale signs up, but the third, the one I was delivering to, had lights on. Parking in front of the house, I took a deep breath and stepped out with the pizza box. The front door opened before I even had a chance to knock. A middle-aged man, balding with thick glasses, greeted me with an awkward smile. "You're quicker than I expected," he said, eyeing the pizza. "Traffic was light," I replied, trying to keep the conversation brief. "That'll be $15. As he fumbled for his wallet, a door somewhere inside the house creaked open, and I heard a faint whimpering sound, like someone trying to call out but their voice stifled. The man's demeanor changed immediately. He stiffened, his eyes darting towards the interior of the house. "That's just the TV," he said hastily, handing me a 20. "Keep the change." I nodded and turned to leave, but the whimpering grew louder, turning into a muffled cry for help. It was unmistakably a human voice, and it was coming from the house. As I paused, contemplating my next move, a white van with tinted windows pulled into the cul-de-sac. It parked behind my car, blocking my exit. 2 men stepped out, both considerably larger than me, talking in hushed tones. They began to approach me. Panic surged. The dots connected in my head all too clearly. An isolated location, a shady customer, and now 2 intimidating men. This wasn't just about a pizza delivery. "Hey!" one of the men called out. "You got another order in there? We're hungry." Thinking on my feet, I pulled out my phone, raised it as if taking a photo, and shouted, "Just got your plates. The police will be here any minute." The 2 men exchanged glances, clearly not expecting this reaction. Seizing the moment, I dashed back to my car, locked the doors, and started the engine. The man from the house charged out, yelling at the others, but I didn't stick around to hear the conversation. I sped past the van, tires screeching, not stopping until I reached the bright lights of the city. I immediately reported everything to the police. They raided the house, but it was empty, save for some evidence suggesting someone had been held there against their will. My statement and the little evidence they found indicated this was likely an attempted kidnapping. In the subsequent weeks, there was a citywide alert for the white van, and residents were warned about suspicious delivery requests. But as far as I know, those men were never caught. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that those men are still out there, waiting for their next unsuspecting victim. And every time I order a delivery, I can't help but worry for the driver, hoping they don't find themselves at the dead end of a sinister plot. It's not often that a night intended for innocent fun and candy turns into the most haunting memory of one's life. Halloween, 2018, a night I'll never forget, no matter how hard I try. The evening began like any other Halloween night. The autumn chill was settling in, and leaves painted in hues of orange and red danced in the wind. Children, dressed as ghouls, witches, and superheroes, walked down the streets, their laughter echoing around. My friends and I, too old for trick-or-treating but not for the fun, decided to go for a nostalgic walk around our old neighborhood. There was one house at the end of our street, the old Miller place, which had always been the topic of many childhood legends. The Millers were an elderly couple who rarely made an appearance, leading to rumors that their house was haunted. This year, surprisingly, the house was lit up, with Halloween decorations plastered all over. We thought maybe someone new moved in. Curiosity getting the better of us, we decided to ring the doorbell. An old woman, presumably Mrs. Miller, opened the door. Her eyes, surrounded by wrinkles, were wide and penetrating. Her smile seemed warm but a bit forced. "Trick or treat," we exclaimed in a playful tone, not expecting any candy. She looked at us, her gaze lingering on each one, making me slightly uncomfortable. "Oh, aren't you all a bit old for this?" she chuckled. "But wait here." She disappeared into the dimly lit house. Whispered conversations began amongst us, mainly discussing how weird it felt. But before we could decide to leave, Mrs. Miller returned with a tray of homemade cookies. "I baked them for the kids, but it seems not many are coming tonight. Please take as many as you'd like." The cookies looked delicious, and despite our reservations, we took some. Just as we were about to thank her and leave, a voice called from inside the house, "Martha, who is it?" A tall, gaunt man emerged from the shadows, staring intently at us. His presence sent chills down my spine. "Just some older kids trick-or-treating, George," she replied. He kept staring, especially at me. "You remind me of someone," he whispered, his voice raspy and unsettling. I nervously laughed. "I've lived around here all my life. Maybe you've seen me before." He stepped closer, making me uneasy. "No," he said, looking deep into my eyes. "Someone from a long time ago." My friends sensed my discomfort, and we quickly thanked them for the cookies and started to leave. As we hurriedly walked away, I glanced back. Both Mr. and Mrs. Miller stood at their doorway, watching us. We tried to laugh it off, attributing our fear to the ambience of Halloween. But as the night wore on, things got even stranger. Later, as we sat on my friend's porch, munching on candies and cookies, a car pulled up near the Miller house. Two individuals looking rather official stepped out and headed towards the home. My phone buzzed. A news alert popped up. "Local elderly couple missing, last seen 2 days ago. If you have any information, contact the authorities immediately." The photo attached to the alert made my heart drop. It was the Millers. My gaze shifted back to the house and realization washed over me. If the Millers had been missing, who were the couple that gave us the cookies? And more importantly, who was the man who seemed to recognize me? The police later discovered that the real Millers had gone on a vacation and returned just a day before Halloween to find their house broken into. The couple who greeted us were imposters, with records that sent shivers down my spine. The man, it turned out, had a history of stalking and had just been released from prison. The woman was his accomplice in several crimes, including identity theft and robbery. Halloween was never the same for me after that night. The masks, costumes, and dark corners always remind me of the horrifying real-life monsters I encountered. To this day, I can't help but wonder what would have happened if we had stayed a little longer, or if we had entered the Miller house. And the haunting question remains, why did that man think he recognized me? While many might think of ghosts and goblins during Halloween, it's the living, breathing humans who often have the capacity to be the scariest monsters of all. I've always loved the charm of old houses, the quirks, the creaks, the history they held within their walls. When I was 22, I rented an ancient home on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of house you'd expect to see in a period drama, with Victorian architecture and sprawling rooms. I was drawn to it immediately, despite the warnings that the place might be more of a hassle due to its age. For the first couple of months, things were relatively uneventful. Sure, the house had its quirks, doors that wouldn't stay shut and floorboards that squealed with every step, but nothing too out of the ordinary. However, it was during a particularly cold November evening when I was left alone in the house for the first time. My roommate had gone to visit family, that things took a terrifying turn. I was lounging in the living room, engrossed in a book, when I heard a soft, rhythmic thumping sound. It seemed to be coming from above. My first thought was that it might be a tree branch brushing against the roof, but a glance outside confirmed that there was no tree close enough to the house. I tried to brush it off and return to my book, but the thumping persisted, growing louder and more insistent. It sounded deliberate, almost like footsteps. I mustered up enough courage to investigate. The thumping seemed to be originating from the attic. Our attic was more of a storage space, a dark, dusty room filled with discarded boxes and old furniture. Neither my roommate nor I ventured up there often. I hesitated at the foot of the attic stairs, the weight of the silence pressing down on me. The only sound was my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Taking a deep breath, I began to ascend. With each step, the thumping grew louder. When I reached the top, I hesitated, my hand on the doorknob, the cold metal biting into my palm. I pushed the door open. The dim light from the hallway illuminated a narrow portion of the attic. There was no one there. But what caught my eye in the center of the room was an old wooden rocking chair. It was swaying back and forth, its motion perfectly in sync with the thumping I'd heard. I was frozen in place, watching the chair rock with no apparent force moving it. My rational mind tried to chalk it up to wind or some other logical explanation, but the windows were shut tight. There was no draft. Suddenly, the chair stopped rocking as if someone had grabbed it. The temperature in the attic seemed to drop several degrees. Then, a voice, cold and raspy, whispered my name. Alex. I turned and fled, not looking back, taking the stairs 2 at a time. I bolted out of the house, my breath visible in the chilly air. I called the police from a neighbor's house, too afraid to go back inside. When the police arrived, they searched the house thoroughly, but found no signs of forced entry. The attic, when they checked, was as still and undisturbed as it always was. The rocking chair sat silently in its place, showing no signs of the eerie movement I'd witnessed. I explained the situation, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes. They advised me to stay with someone for the night, and I gladly complied, crashing at a friend's place. The next day, still shaken, I did some research on the house. I learned that, over a century ago, it belonged to a woman named Clara. Clara had lost her young child and had reportedly gone mad with grief, spending hours in the attic, sitting in a rocking chair, murmuring to herself. Neighbors claimed they often heard her talking to someone, even though she lived alone after her child's death. It was said that she passed away in that very attic, still waiting for her child to come back to her. The pieces fell into place in my mind. The rocking chair, the voice, the coldness. Was Clara's spirit still trapped in that house, forever mourning her lost child? I moved out shortly after. I couldn't bear the thought of another night there, knowing the history of the place. The house was eventually put back on the market, but I noticed it remained vacant for a long time. Every so often I drive past the old house. Sometimes, when the world is quiet and the wind whispers through the trees, I swear I can hear the soft thumping of a rocking chair from the attic, and Clara's voice, forever calling out for her lost child.